What are large ossified institutions? Why do they often do more harm than good, and what can be done about it? I first became intrigued with this topic when I was working as a psychiatrist in state hospitals and large psychiatric institutions in Canada, the US, and in Scotland. Here's an example. In a very good mental hospital called Dingleton Hospital in Scotland, I met a patient who was 45 named Willie. He was admitted when he was 18 with a diagnosis of epilepsy. And in those days, epilepsy was incurable, so he had remained institutionalized until he was 45. Now, however, he was so dependent on the institution that we were unable to help him move out and live a normal life. Another patient named Watson was admitted in his early 20s. He was now 55. He was admitted because he had a schizophrenic mental illness. He was openly psychotic, but he recovered in a month or two, as people often did. But like in the case of Willie, the belief was that once you had a mental illness, it was a mental illness for life. Fortunately, Watson was not so regressed. I was able to help him move into a halfway house we set up on the hospital grounds. From there, I helped him get a job delivering coal on a coal truck. And within 6 months, he had moved into a halfway house in the community and was leading a normal life. How did large mental institutions get this way? Well, it turns out that Dorothea Dix, a social reformer in the United States in the mid-1800s, was appalled at the ill treatment of the insane in almshouses, jails, and contracted facilities. And so she led a social movement which spread around the world to create asylums, where people could be treated more humanely with good food and good shelter. Those asylums morphed into the snake pits of the 1900s, where there were many exposés. And I did a lot of work to replace institutions, large institutions with small family-like settings. For example, we admitted acutely psychotic patients into healthy private homes instead of hospitals, and it turned out that a random assignment study found this worked much better. How does this apply to the large ossified institutions of development today? Well, the social process, from my perspective, turns out to be exactly the same thing. The World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations Development Program, all were formed as institutions from radical ideas related to helping the poor move out of poverty. But now what's the problem? Well, one of the problems is that the World Bank has so much overhead that it's very difficult for it to loan money in amounts smaller than $5 million. But most of the people who are very poor in the world live in small villages and need smaller amounts of money. Until we can find ways of batching small amounts of money to make big amounts of money, it'll be very difficult to work. An even bigger problem is that the World Bank, UNDP, and virtually all of the large multilateral donors have to give their money, provide their money through the governments of developing countries. That's a good idea, and it has a very rational basis, but it really hasn't worked. It's failed. A lot of that money gets diverted into Swiss bank accounts, but even worse, a lot of the projects that are in the self-interest of the ruling elites in the governments of developing countries are not projects that are at all in the self-interest of poor people, and so much of the money gets wasted on poor projects. I would, of course, change the rules and deliver 80% of the $100 billion or so that goes to development each year, not through the governments of developing countries, but to any organization or individual at the grassroots who can show measurable impact and scale. That, of course, is going to be politically difficult or impossible. I think we face a lot of challenges. And the biggest challenge and one of the biggest institutions with the greatest potential for ending poverty is big business. But multinational corporations today, for the most part, share the belief that emerging markets cannot be profitable. They are instead focused on things like corporate social responsibility, which to me usually ends up simply being cosmetic movements with good PR. Not always, but in the vast majority of cases. There are exceptions. Mobile phones have reached the bottom billion customer, but there aren't very many exceptions at scale in big business. I think we need nothing less than a revolution in how big business designs, prices, markets, and distributes its products. I think there are at least 20 Henry Ford-sized virgin market opportunities available for new multinational companies formed under totally different principles. Principles of designing transformative, radically affordable products and services and delivering them through radically decentralized supply chains. What I'm devoting a good deal of the rest of my life to is creating a model for that. I formed a company called Windhorse International. Its first commercial activity is in selling safe drinking water to people in very small villages in rural India. We think that we can make attractive profits doing this, and that we can eventually reach between 100 and 200 million customers in rural areas in the world who now are getting sick and spending a lot of money on their illnesses from drinking bad water. If this model works, I think it can rapidly be applied in a whole host of other areas, like affordable energy and affordable health products, like affordable eyeglasses.